An American living in Germany is currently facing 60 days in jail or a $4,000 fine for a couple of tweets.
I'm C.J. Hopkins, and I'm a playwright and a novelist and a political satirist. When I'm forced to describe my ideology, I tell people I'm an old lefty.
CJ was commenting on Germany's strict COVID policies, which he compared to the Nazis. For this, prosecutors charged him with disseminating propaganda, and recently, a German court ordered full-on anti-terror security protocols for his upcoming trial.
I met C.J. Hopkins about a dozen years ago when I was living in Berlin, working as a journalist. And C.J., he was teaching a class, I got wind of it, and I joined.
I left shortly after the U.S. invasion of Iraq. I was opposed to that invasion from the beginning and helped to organize the big protests in New York. I was a playwright, so I helped organize the theater community for those protests.
He sort of reminded me of the dude in The Big Lebowski with his long hair, and he hand rolls cigarettes.
Back then, I was called a Saddam lover, a Saddam apologist, a terrorist apologist. The atmosphere was really oppressive, and I was miserable. I figured, what the hell, I'll take a chance and try to go live in Europe.
He started writing a blog, and it was called The Consent Factory.
I've covered the COVID pandemic. I haven't really been interested in the virus. I've been interested in how societies all around the world, not just here in Germany, were so abruptly, instantly, almost effortlessly transformed into quasi-pathologized police states. The Germans did a particularly German version of it.
Certain shops are to be closed, other shops are restricted in their opening hours, restaurants are restricted in their opening hours, cinemas, gyms, and all those kinds of institutions are being closed down.
Which, as an American, was really disturbing.
A number of German states already bar the unvaccinated from public venues.
And there was some kind of Twitter movement going around with a hashtag saying, die Masken bleiben auf, it means the masks stay on. By that time, I had lived here long enough that I felt entitled to jab the Germans a bit.
He published a book of these essays, and the cover of the book features a cloth mask with a translucent, barely visible swastika.
I talked with my brilliant cover artist. He's done the cover of all my books. We basically stole the cover of William Shirer's internationally famous book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. What we did is we covered up the swastika with one of the medical-looking masks.
So it shouldn't take an artistic theorist to look at this cover and realize that what he was doing was comparing COVID policies to the policies of the Nazis. I think we should be very sparing in how we invoke the Nazis. But what's really a bridge too far is how the German government responded to this.
So I tweeted one tweet, and I wrote, the masks are ideological conformity symbols. Then there was another tweet. Karl Lauterbach, the German health minister, was interviewed in Die Welt, German newspaper. And Die Welt tweeted a big picture of Karl Lauterbach and a quote from him. And his quote in German was, "The masks always send out a signal." And I thought, yes, that's exactly my point. Karl, that's what they're for. And so I just retweeted that tweet from Die Welt with Karl on it, and stuck the cover art of my book on that tweet as well.
CJ, for tweeting the cover of his book, he was then served with a court appearance. He was charged with a crime, promoting the tenets of National Socialism. The context in which he was being prosecuted was for criticizing a German politician, which is something that we do every day in the United States, which is something that everyone in every society should be allowed to do. And they should be allowed to do it in pretty harsh terms.
What amounts to an organ of the German government had the tweets censored by Twitter, had my book banned by Amazon, basically initiated a criminal investigation of me for those two tweets, and possibly banned in bookstores. I don't have any official notice of this, but it's impossible to get the book in German bookstores as well.
The German law used against CJ, Article 86A, bans use of symbols of unconstitutional and terrorist organizations outside the context of art or science, research or teaching.
Even this law is not that badly written. I understand the ban on swastikas by Nazis in Germany. It's the only exception that I think I'd make to my free speech absolutism, but there are clear exceptions that are written into the ban. And of course there are, because if there weren't, you couldn't sell a history book with a swastika on the cover. You couldn't show a Rammstein video. You couldn't show a Quentin Tarantino film. You couldn't educate children about the Nazis.
There's also satire, a satirical German television show, which following the elections in neighboring Austria, in which the far-right Freedom Party did quite well, they produced an image of a schnitzel in the shape of a swastika. That was clearly a work of satire, was making fun of Austria.
Of course, there are exceptions, and one of those exceptions, stated very clearly, is swastikas can be displayed for the purposes of opposing unconstitutional activity.
The fact that the government went after him for this sort of, in some way, validated his criticism. If you're being criticized for being a fascist as a government agency, and then you bring criminal penalties against the person who's accusing you of that, that's pretty authoritarian, that's pretty fascistic behavior.
The next thing we knew, I received an order of punishment from the German court. So my guilt has already been established and my punishment has already been determined, right? So the punishment is 60 days in jail or 3,600 euro fine.
So I spoke with CJ in January over Zoom before his trial. And a few weeks later, CJ and his lawyers went before the judge.
Heute wurde der Satiriker und Autor C.J. Hopkins.
The trial got underway and the judge started interrogating me. And then there was a long segment dedicated to trying to determine whether the swastika in the cover art image appeared behind the mask or on top of the mask. And the prosecutor, had to admit and acknowledge that he didn't actually think that I was trying to promote, Nazism or Nazi propaganda. So I was acquitted of the charges, and that was a huge relief. And we were all very happy about it. My lawyer reminded me, okay, we can celebrate, but keep in mind that the Berlin District Prosecutor now has a week to appeal your acquittal.
Germany, unlike the United States, allows for double jeopardy. So if a case is thrown out by a judge, that's not the end of the story. The prosecutor can still get another crack at finding a defendant guilty.
Either side can appeal the judge's verdict, and I really didn't expect it to happen just because of the way that the trial went. But sure enough, my lawyer faxed to court, and yes, the Berlin District Prosecutor has appealed my acquittal, which means now I'm facing a second trial in appeals court. Once again, I'm pissed off. I was relieved and I thought I was finally, going to be able to put this behind me and move on. And I can't believe that they're actually going to take me to trial again.
CJ waited several months to get the date for his second trial. He finally got a notice that his case would be reheard on August 15th. But that's not all he was told. The court deemed CJ's case a high-security trial and ordered anti-terror security protocols, which CJ told me means no phones, cameras, pens, hats, or jackets. Hopkins thinks this is to intimidate his legal team, discourage press coverage, and prevent accurate reporting of the trial.
The lesson that I hope people will draw from this, what is happening here, is the authorities want to crack down on dissent.
And as if this story wasn't ridiculous already, Karl Lauterbach, Germany's health minister, whom CJ was criticizing in his tweet, recently sent out this tweet, comparing Germany's far-right AfD party to the Nazis. Spoiler alert, Lauterbach wasn't charged with the crime. And here's the cover of a new issue of Der Spiegel, Germany's popular weekly news magazine.
And they're doing that to send a message to people. And that message is, shut up and follow orders, or we will get you.
If you don't have those fundamental free speech protections, and more importantly, the culture of free speech that we have in this country, you're going to wind up like a C.J. Hopkins.